Thank you, Michael, for your generous and kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. Today I would like to take this opportunity to talk about measuring income and multidimensional poverty and its implications for policy. When I had the discussion with Jonathan about this, I really convey my support about having this discussion because it's a very timely and very important topic to be discussed, especially on poverty and also inequality. But I don't think I will be able to do justice by covering both for now, but I would like to focus on the measuring income and multidimensional poverty, but I will address inequality also slightly here and there. And I hope the second speaker will evoke this more rigorously. So the question is why talk about measuring income and multidimensional poverty. I think among the development economies we agree that there is a gap in terms of the two measures, as we can see from the following graph. I'm sorry, I have to update this. Okay. If you look at this, sorry, I think this is just make it informal, I don't have my mic. So simply this is just telling you about if countries measured by the two indicators are perfectly met, every country should have been in the 45-degree line. So the horizontal line is actually a proportion of multidimensional poor, and the horizontal line is the income poor. And the countries below the 45-degree lines are more multidimensionally poor, relatively, while above it is more income poor. So this is what motivated my talk about looking at the two measures of income and non-income dimension. So my talk will be structured according to the following outline. We'll be very brief on the poverty measurements, and the second and third we'll discuss about the single dimension of poverty, basically is money metric, and the second one is the multidimensional measure of poverty. And then I will just briefly go about what we have been doing in Indonesia to address this poverty with money metric, in terms of money metric and multidimensional, and we'll make some concluding remarks. I think we all agree that poverty has been seen as a multidimensional notion. But it turned out to be very difficult, as we all know, to have a measure that will adequately capture this multidimensionality, accounted from the ecological and multi-level context of well-being, and most importantly is facilitate comparison over time. Because we would like to know about intervention if they work or not. So we have to have comparability across time and sometimes also across country. So, but we know that defining and measuring poverty appropriately is critically important for designing and implementing poverty reduction program. That's what we are doing at the Vice President Office. For example, I would like to know exactly about what has been happening with health, education, and other non-income dimensions. So we need a reliable definition and measurement so that it helps government and donors to formulate policy and to see about this causes of poverty, and also to see about how our intervention has been affecting the life of the poor. So in general, there are two approaches in defining poverty. The first one is the so-called money metric, or monetary approach, which basically is using consumption or income based on the usually household level data. The second one is this non-monetary approach, started with Professor Sen, a Nobel laureate, as we all know. It's a capability approach and then also by chambers, and also social exclusion, including unemployment, political participation, social capital, and most importantly is the last two indicators, which is about health and education. So let me start by describing very briefly on the one-dimensional poverty measures. So this is based on the idea of poverty line, separating the poor and the non-poor. And on this measure, there are two terminology, which is absolute poverty, usually linked to the basic welfare, using income and consumption again. Most of the issues being raised in this absolute poverty is about bundle of goods to be included in the calculation of setting up the poverty line, and then per capita or adult equivalence, because usually surveys collected on the basis of household survey, and then you just divide it up by the number of people living in that household. But of course there are children, there are elderly, and the consumption pattern, the needs are different. The second issue is about this so-called economies of scale. For those of you economists are well aware about this economic scale of issues. If you have additional children, it doesn't mean that you have to spend more on the housing, for example. And the second issue, we can use this consumption-based measure to measure poverty, relatively speaking. Interpret poverty in relation to living standard in a given country. It depends on the norm. And then stress economic inequality as the primary indicator of poverty. Cutoff point usually is arbitrary, and it's not useful sometimes for monitoring because it's changing every time. It depends on the social construct. So the case of Indonesia, we made a lot of progress in defining and measuring poverty. Already started during Suharto year in 1974. We used the data so-called the socio-economic survey, considered to be one of the best in the world, at least according to Ibu Sri Mulyani, who is now the managing director of the World Bank, because she can see global data supplier, how it's good or not. And then the critical issue is setting up the poverty line. Indonesia currently still using the so-called 2100, the anchor is 2100 kilocalorie per capita per day. And then will be used as a basis of the calculating the food poverty line. The second one is the non-food poverty line, which is basically a basic need, or we can also use this so-called the angle curve. So poverty line is the summation of the food poverty line and the non-food poverty line. And those living up above it is non-poor, and below that line is considered to be poor. So there is a tricky issue here, that's so-called the reference population. I've written a paper in a Journal of Economic and Wealth with Len Pritchard, my colleague, who is now somewhere in India, about this reference population. The way how we did it is by setting up reference population about 20% above that line, whatever is the existing poverty line. So the tricky thing is, it looks like very straightforward, setting up the poverty line. Seemingly straightforward, but this can be deceptive, simply because of the issue of reference population. What do I mean by deceptive? Two researchers, me and Sarah, my dear friend Sarah, for example, using exactly the same methodology, the same 2100 kilocalorie can have a different, and same data sources can have a different poverty head count, simply because of the different priors. If you believe poverty in Indonesia is 10%, and then your reference population is about the consumption pattern of those in that 10%. But if I believe that poverty rate is about 15%, then my reference population is going to be that line. So the difference between of that prior of 5 percentage point can be about 7 percentage point. Why is that so? Because if you look at this is the welfare status of household that you are planning to use as your reference population. Horizontal line, vertical line is the price of the calorie that you are using for setting up your poverty line. If you believe, this is your prior about poverty rate in that country, and then you will see the price of calorie using two different estimation. It's going to be much cheaper to get that 2100 calorie compared if you believe that the poverty line is at that level, for example. So 2100 calorie, whose consumption pattern is going to be used to to make your poverty line. So for example, Hannah actually can fulfill her 2100 kilocalorie with much sexy food, expensive, and accounted for 2,100 kilocalories, but pickup driver in my hometown in Semarang will have the same level of calorie of 2,100 kilocalorie. It will cost them about 150,000 per month per capita, while Hannah will cost her about, let's say, 600,000 per month per capita. So you will have a completely different numbers. So that's what the tricky thing about this poverty line. We keep updating our method. We also report it directly to the Vice President. That's the beauty of working under the smart Vice President like Sudarno, and we agree about this one, and we need to review our methodology in the future, but not now, because it's going to be politically difficult. Whether is poverty going to increase or to decrease, it depends on your prior. So that's one about the measurement. It's been a lot of progress. Hundreds of papers in the journal, academic journal, has been addressing this issue. So what has been the storyline using that consumption poverty? There's been a lot of progress globally about a decade ago, for example. In the past, it was dominated by India, China, and then a decade later, actually it's mostly dominated by a country like, this is Nigeria, India is getting smaller, Indonesia is also making a lot of progress. Ini bisa diperbaiki nggak ya? I think it's not very good ya, nggak bisa dilihat, that's alright. So, what about the Southeast Asia, especially East Asia, as our neighboring countries? Is also over the last 3 decades, a significant progress has been achieved. 1981 is about 1 billion people living under $1 in $25 a day, and by now it's only about less than 250 million people living under poverty line. But as you can see here, I think it's been very slow over the last couple of years in terms of the achievement in addressing poverty. This probably has something to do with addressing the chronic poor. It's much more difficult to achieve those people living under that chronically poor. What are the missing point here with the one-dimensional measure of poverty, as I mentioned from the beginning, that motivates this talk, is that it does not, first, it does not capture the provision of public good and non-market commodities, does not capture the notion of social exclusion, and also it assumes equal distribution of resources at the household level. As we know that it gives money to the husband, it will have an impact differently to the welfare of the household compared if you give the money to the ibu and the mothers, for example. And this is very common, that having enough income does not guarantee occurring non-income dimension. It happened in India, even the top decile, the illiteracy rate is about 33%. So that's why we need another measure of multidimensional poverty. So to reiterate my point, again, this is the same storyline, is the mismatch between the income and non-income dimension. I took 2 examples which is very important on education and health. Take a country of India, for example. Between the poor and the non-poor, they are completely matched. Their children malnutrition is about 53%. In India, for those who are living above poverty line and those who are living under poverty line. The same thing is also happening in other countries. So this is again reiterated the point that we also need to look at beyond the consumption or income-based measure of poverty. They are necessary but not sufficient. So that's why I quote Professor Amartya Sen, the guru in multidimensional poverty, that human life are bettered and diminished in all kinds of different ways, and the first task is to acknowledge the deprivation of very different kinds have to be accommodated within a general framework within a general overreaching framework. That's lead him to a project with the UN on this OP, Multidimensional Poverty Index, now being developed by Jim Foster, my advisor at that time at Vanderbilt, now at Oxford, and also at George Washington University. Continue working on this, defining this. There's been a lot of debate all over the world with the bank, with my colleague at the bank about, do we need this kind of measure because it's not comparable over time. And there's been a lot of debate on this one, but we believe that this is critically important. 3 dimensions, education, health, and standard of living. And health has the 2 indicators, school attendance and years of schooling. Health consists of also 2 measures, nutrition and child mortality. And then well-being consists of about 5 different indicators, including cooking, fuel, floor, electricity, etc. Using this method, the way this about 1/2 for the first two, 1/2, 1/2, and 1/6 the other one. So again, this is reiterated mismatch again. Some countries are more multidimensionally poor, while others are more income poor. In the case of Indonesia, this is Indonesia. Jadi, Indonesia is somewhere around here. This is Indonesia, I believe. The vertical line is on the multidimensional poor. This one is income poor. So Indonesia is more income poor than multidimensional poor. This is the data in 2003. But if you look at the average between 2003 and 2011, actually Indonesia is more multidimensional poor relatively than consumption poor. So it's a changing every time. It's still useful to look at how is the country progressing and addressing both consumption and non-consumption measure of poverty. And if you break it down in terms of the share of each cell, actually has been Indonesia especially mostly dominated by cooking fuel, meaning you know what kind of cooking fuel you use, a firewood, gasoline, not gasoline, it's a kerosene, and child mortality, I believe, and then this one is sanitation. And if you look at the contribution, it's mostly child mortality contributed about 50% to the Indonesian multidimensional poverty. So this is a very important that we take into consideration when addressing this poverty multidimensional. So what has been the Indonesian effort in addressing this both consumption and non-consumption measure of poverty? This is my favorite innovation about the evolution of Indonesian social policy program. So I happened to work in these 3 different governments during the new order. Mostly it's a broad-based economic development, construction of road, irrigation, hydro resort, and there's no specific program addressing to poverty with the exception of the left behind village, EDT, but that's still actually a small area geographic targeting. So it's not individually receiving this grant. Only after the Asian financial crisis in 97-98 that hit the country very badly, that added up newly poor people almost about 20 million additional, we introduced this so-called social safety net program. At that time, I was in the middle of this crisis that drive the fall of President Sudarno government, where we introduced the so-called Rice for the Poor. At that time, this OPK, Operasi Special Market Operation, health, education assistance, and also employment generation through this so-called, not PNPM yet, but this is actually a block grant to the community so that they can use for generate job during that hard time that we experienced. And then the evolution of this second generation of, I call it the first generation of social protection, is this post-Asian financial crisis. Actually, we make use of the experience we generated over almost a decade in implementing social policy targeted program. With some improvement, we continue with the Rice for the Poor program, scholarship for the poor, and then cash transfer is a new innovation started in 2005, and then conditional cash transfer. This is some like progress and opportunity and Bolsa Familia in Brazil, in addition to health system or Jamkesmas. I have with Professor Suar written several note about the effectiveness of this program during that crisis and also afterward, for example. But again, it's very complicated when it comes to policy making process. You know, I think this is what Suar has always been reminded me. Evidence is one thing, but policy brokering, how can we enlighten the policy makers in the government to make sure that this is a good program, is a very difficult political battle. So this is our favorite graph, which basically touches your question about inequality. This is based on data, panel data, real time, in the real term between 2008 and 2012, actually, looking at the growth incident curve, GIC, looking at what has been the growth of income in every decile of the population in Indonesia. As you can see, it's skewed to the left in terms of only grew about 2% when the national income grew about 4.5%. That's what drive inequality has been the highest in the history of the Republic over about 40 years, using Gini as our indicators. So basically, this is what the government is trying to do by differentiating different subset of the community or the population, introducing poverty reduction and social protection for the bottom 40% or bottom 25% at the present time because of the budget limitation, and then the middle income using this basically investment climate, and sometimes also health insurance at some segment of the society, and then the top 10, top 20 is basically what they need is about the business climate. So this is basically the overview about program in trying to address this multidimensional poverty. Different dimensions need to be addressed differently because of the response are also different. So here is probably already presented, I'm not sure about this one, but basically this is the innovation that country has been developed over the years, addressing poverty and vulnerability by using this clustering. The first cluster is basically, stabilizing income through targeted programs. This is a family-based social assistance, including health, education, assistance, cash transfer, whether in a good time and also bad time and during the time of shock. The second one is basically for the community-driven development. This is a PMDM Mandiri that we have been advocating over the years and has been the largest CDD program in the world, that many countries come to Indonesia to learn how Indonesia has been addressing the participation. And the third one is the cluster 3, so-called, which we are working on it, is to refine this approach. It's mostly the small and medium enterprise, but we'd like to have more focus on the job creation for the poor and vulnerable. So national team for the accelerated poverty reduction, where Pak Sua is the coordinator for the working group, we've been working to coordinate this effort across line ministers, and evidence-based policies are our motto, and we try to do our best to convince the policymaker to make the right decision, So, in conclusion, I think we all agree, I hope, so that establishing reliable poverty definition and measurement is important. Step in working with and helping the poor and vulnerable. Consumption-based measure of poverty or income-based is one way, and we have made the progress on this measurement. But there are significant limitations, as I just highlighted, globally and also for the case of Indonesia. Multidimensional poverty measure can complement but should not replace our consumption-based measure. Why is that so? Because this consumption-based is quick, and we can see progress over time, and that will be government usually use for this purpose. Measuring is not enough to its own, we also need to act, so I'm speaking like a politician here. We need to act. And to act effectively, we need to continue recognizing and basing policy so that poverty is multidimensional and affect population groups differently, as I illustrated from the beginning. And just as poverty is multidimensional, Indonesian government has realized and tried to address every individual dimension to, make a better living for the people living in this country. So that's basically the major takeaways of this talk, and I have the supplementing paper on this one if you're interested on the trickiness on the seemingly clear cut of the poverty line. I'm happy to provide the detailed nitty-gritty of what do I mean by that. Thank you very much.